Hi, this is Debbie Maldonado. I'm here with Dr. Rob, my husband.
Nice to be here.
Debbie and Dr. Rob, subscribe to our channel below if you're on YouTube. And today we're going to talk about the mind and the Jungian model of the psyche. For those brainiacs out there, those exceptional people that really like deep, juicy stuff, Rob has a very wonderful meal to serve you right now.
Well, we'll see about that. But, you know, let's start with the ego.
Well, let's start with the mind in general. Has different components, or?
Absolutely. You know, if you just look at what's out there on the internet and magazines, a lot of you might get the impression that we know a lot about the mind, meaning us as humanity, as scientists and psychologists. But really, we know very little. And it's a very complex thing, the mind, and most of the models are very simplistic. They're very kind of mechanical, or they try to break it down into very basic components. Jung's model is a little bit different. It leaves a lot to interpretation, which is really the correct approach, because it leaves room for exploration.
And we're talking about Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist. Our work is based on Jungian spiritual psychology.
And Eastern philosophy.
Yes.
And we also incorporate modern, current neuroscience. So all that together, we kind of get the best picture of the mind that we can. So let's break it down to three components. First of all, you got the ego.
Got the ego.
The personal unconscious, and then the collective unconscious.
Okay.
So a lot of people think of the ego as the central part of the conscious mind, meaning when you're awake, the ego is the one that experiences this waking world and says, I'm going to do this, I'm going to the store, I'm enjoying myself, etc.
And that's the idea of I, the me, the I, the self-reference to you as an individual.
Yes.
And we think that we're the center of the universe.
Because we are.
Yes.
No, the ego is actually just a small part of the conscious mind, but in most of our lives, and because we really don't, most of us don't work with our mind, it kind of becomes entrenched as the central focus of our waking life.
So we think of mindset, we think, I gotta make my ego think differently. I gotta think positive. My ego has beliefs, I gotta change those. And what we're really doing is working on such a tiny little piece of our consciousness in that area.
Yeah, the conscious mind has other elements. Primarily, this is an important piece. In Greek philosophy, they called it the divine logic, or logos. And it is a divine part of our mind in the sense that it's able to step outside itself and observe itself thinking. So this ability in our conscious mind, if you don't know how to use it, most of the time it just kind of lays dormant there, and you know, we focus on our ego.
And most of the time we're not even conscious. We go through the day and our mind is just chattering away, and we don't realize that behind that chatter is this witness that's following us around, just quietly watching, witnessing, and just taking it all in. And the ego's just freaking out and worried about everything, and you know, that type of. But we forget that other part of our mind. And in Eastern philosophy, a lot of them people refer to it as the witness.
Yes.
And that divine intellect is really where the seat of our creativity and access to deeper parts of ourself. But we're so in our heads, and so our mind is so busy that we never get to access that. So a way to do that would be meditation, would be a way to access that.
Meditation, all
certain types, like
all the contemplative practices, mindfulness, meditation, visualization, guided imagery, all those help to really understand and open the mind to these deeper possibilities besides just focusing on the ego. And now the ego itself is not bad, but it's simply like a survival mechanism. It's the Swiss Army knife of the mind that...
The survival kit.
Yeah, it helps to survive and get through the day and get home for dinner.
And it was really developed when we were kids and based on our environment of what worked for us, what didn't work for us, what we should be afraid of. And so it's that part of us that if we were bit by a dog when we were a kid, gets scared when we see a dog again, not a kid again. And we have this, it's really a protective survival mind, but it's not a bad thing, because without it, we wouldn't be here right now. So a lot of people give it a bad rap, but it's done a really good job of keeping us alive, keeping us our head above water, and watching out for danger and all those things.
Yeah. The problem enters when you consider that it's conditioned.
Yes.
In other words, every experience that you experienced since you were born, your ego reacts to it and records it as either good or bad. Now that conditioning is running automatically, and so if you don't work with it, if you don't understand that part of your mind, you're going to react and make decisions about your life out of a conditioned mind. And that's a mistake, because it's a very limited mind. Even if you've had the best childhood and the best experiences a human being could possibly have, it's still limited because it doesn't really express the full range of the full potential of the mind.
And the ego is sort of like that condition with the carrot or the stick. It goes toward what's pleasurable, and then it moves away from what is unpleasant and uncomfortable. And so if you're trying to have big dreams in your life, if you're trying to find love and you have a pattern of not really finding great relationships, that means your ego thinks that's the comfort zone. Struggling with money or struggling with love or relationships or even your body the ego's like, this is good. And there must be some kind of danger outside of that in order to have what you want. So the ego's holding you back. And so that's where it inhibits our life. It keeps us alive, but it'll only take us to a certain point. It really just keeps us in this kind of safety zone. And a lot of times it's not as pleasant as we want it to be, but the thought of stepping out of it is super unpleasant for the ego. That's why it pulls us back.
Yeah, so in the Upanishads, Eastern philosophy, it says your mind can be your best friend or your worst enemy. And it all depends, obviously, on if you work with it.
Yes.
If you're able to work with your mind, it's your best friend. But if you leave it to run on autopilot, it acts like an enemy, because it inhibits you from going places and making decisions that contradict or scare the ego.
And so when you work in personal development, the real goal is not to fix the ego and make it better. The real goal is to recognize it and then make a choice outside of it, not let it stop you anymore. It's not to berate or judge the ego and say, you got to change, you're bad, you made all these bad decisions. It's more, or you need to be more confident. It's more that, okay, now I can make a clear choice, because now I see my pattern here, and now I can make another choice. But here's the trick, though, and I know we're getting into this, is the unconscious mind, the personal unconscious. If we could just make choices, and I think a lot of people have tried that, to think positive, and I'm going to break out of my patterns, and I'm going to, go to the gym every day, or I'm going to go out and date, and I'm going to face my fears, or walk on coals or something to fight these conditioned patterns. We don't really, we can only get so far because of the personal unconscious. And it's a very, very different way to work with the personal unconscious from a Jungian perspective. Yeah,
and there's a lot of misunderstanding out there as well. We hear people talk about reprogramming their unconscious mind or their subconscious. Now, there's nothing wrong with that idea. There is something to it. But the mind is not that simple. The Jungian model gives us a better understanding of it. So there's two parts to the unconscious mind. The first part is the personal unconscious. That personal unconscious is very much like the Freudian model, where the unconscious is seen as a repository of repressed wishes, forgotten dreams, neglected aspirations. All those things kind of get stored in your personal unconscious. And
so your memories,
Yeah, they lay dormant there until they pop up in a dream, or
You get triggered by something.
Yeah, something triggers you, and there's anxiety or something like that. That's a basic Freudian model, and Jung kind of agrees with that to a certain point. The collective unconscious that Jung talks about is very different. It is basically a creative and dynamic part of the mind that is unconscious. Now, it's not unconscious in itself, meaning
It's not like in a coma.
yeah, it's not in a coma. It's an unfortunate term, but he calls it unconscious mainly because we are unconscious of it.
And so the personal unconscious really has to do with your personal history, things you personally experience, your ego has personally experienced in your life. And then the collective is basically our connection to the universe, our universal knowledge, our universal collective experience.
Yeah. Yes.
As a human being, as being in this planet, in this time and age, and eons before.
Right, right. Yeah, so you can think of it, everything you've experienced, some of it would be stored in your personal unconscious as memory, as, experience somehow. But the collective unconscious goes beyond your personal experience. Now you're talking about universal, or what he called archetypal symbols and elements that go beyond anything you've experienced as an individual.
So if you could give an example of the personal unconscious, what would that be? A fear, or
yeah, so
something like a fear that you have, that, like I said, the biting the dog, or
right. If you got bit by a dog when you were a kid, in your personal unconscious would be that memory.
But not everyone has that, so it's personal to you.
It's personal to you, and it would serve as maybe as a protective mechanism. You might not even remember the incident, but your body would remember and react accordingly. And
then also in the personal unconscious, we have experiences that aren't like about an experience, but about a collective experience, not to think of another term, but about, when we're raised in a certain family, the certain type of socioeconomic culture, or religious, all those things that we're exposed to in our personal history when we're young, that is also personal. So if we have a personal relationship with a certain religion, or a personal relationship with our culture versus another culture, those are in our personal unconscious too. So not only just experiences are logged in, but we absorb so much about basically how to relate to people, how to relate to the world, how do we relate to money, based on what we witness as kids. That's very individual to each person. And then I guess when we go to the collective, it's more universal.
More universal, and Jung essentially paints it as the fountain of creativity. So if you ever wondered, how is Michelangelo or Mozart or any of the creative geniuses that have been throughout history, how did they do that kind of work? It springs from that collective unconscious. They're tapping into it. It's not something personal that they experienced. It's like Mozart would say that he would hear the music already completed in his mind. So that it's coming from a deeper part of the psyche. And we all have access to it. It's simply that we all stay on the surface. Again, because if we go back to the ego, we're very attached and identified with the ego, when we could be going deeper into that unconscious, that collective unconscious.
And what I see, back to the beginning of this video, is we talked about the divine intelligence. That is the key. I mean, we don't want to just knock ourselves out and be unconscious so we can get to the collective. How do we get there? We don't need to leave our bodies or float and have lucid dreaming, which is also another way to do it. But what we want to do is we want to find a way to not be so in our ego and be able to have that clear mind from the divine intelligence that's conscious. And basically it's like a direct access to a deeper part of our mind. But see, most people, I would say predominantly most people, especially people that do personal development even, they are working on that personal ego, and they're working on the personal unconscious, and they're really just kind of working throughout their lives and making their personal life better, forgiving their parents. And that's great. I mean, we have to do those things, but then there's a time where we need to transcend that. We need to stop hanging onto our story from this life and see that we're a universal, powerful being. And we have so much more that we can do with our life. And if we keep fiddling with our personal history all the time and trying to, you know, resolve the past all the time, we never really get to the potential that lies within us.
Yeah, so the question would be, how do we approach that unconscious mind? Not only the personal unconscious, but the deeper unconscious mind, the collective. And the answer that Jung gives is essentially that we do it through the process of individuation. Now, individuation simply means integrating those two elements, your conscious mind, your ego conscious mind, and your unconscious mind, and bringing the unconscious to awareness.
Now that sounds kind of like hard to get how we merge the two, but basically we're already merged with our ego. We already know it. So it's about really bringing up this other element of us. And so I don't have a good metaphor for this that might make it simple for people to grasp, because it is such a heavy concept. There's a saying in the Upanishads that there's two birds sitting in a tree. One bird eats the sweet and sour fruits of life, while the other bird sits and watches in detachment. And so basically what we want to do is we want to have access to understand both parts of our mind. We want to integrate, have the human experience of the heartache and the love and the passion and the fears and all, you know, the whole range of emotions of being human, but also have a connection to our divine self, that universal mind, that we won't get lost and caught up. It's almost like standing on the side of the river watching the craziness of life, but not fall into it where we get lost in it. So the integration is actually bringing up our really divine nature and integrating it into our life, where we're not just responding and reacting to things that happen to us and feel powerless over them. We start to look at things in a more wise, divine way and say, what is this saying about my mind? Why did this show up? And how can I transcend this to have the results that I want in my life?
Yeah. So according to Jung, this individuation process is a natural, innate function in human nature. In other words, we all have it, and we're all born with it. But because we don't pay attention to our psyche, we never engage with it.
We just kind of it's like letting ourselves just run on autopilot. And that's what most people do. And our mission is to help people free their mind from that. It's that herd mentality, as Jung would say, is that we're taught what to like, we're taught how to believe certain things. We watch the news and the television and the mass media, and we think this is what beauty is, this is what wealth is, this is what success is, what a good life means, and we just basically are hypnotized by the world, and we just kind of fall into line. But there's a moment we all have in our life, and some people answer the call and some people just keep pushing it away, but that there has to be something more. There has to be something more to life. And that's really why I love Jung's work so much, is because he gives us a map to have that experience in life that is so much more than just making getting my paycheck at the end of the week and waiting for the weekend, going to happy hour, which is always fun, but you can't live your life that way. And really having a richer life and really stretching yourself to see what's possible, to create beautiful things, create art, write beautiful books, perform, do things that no one else thought you can do. There's so much there.
Absolutely. So we'll continue this conversation. Obviously, there's a lot more to it. But for now, think about these things. Think about the ego, your relationship to it, how attached are you to this ego. Think about your personal history. How much have you repressed? How much have you forgotten about your experiences in life? And then think about the potential of a collective unconscious that's a fountain of creativity. Not only artistic creativity, a lot of the scientific advances have come through dreams, through this intuitive understanding of a deeper knowledge in us.
And so if you want to just practice something really easily to get access to that divine intelligence that we have, is just pay attention to your thoughts. Get in touch with that witness. Spend about 5 minutes every morning just listening to your thoughts. And just the fact that you are always listening to your thoughts, but to consciously listen, you start to see that it's a separation a little bit of those two parts of your mind. Right now they're just kind of meld together, and it's like letting that ego be in doing its thing, and then the divine mind starts to free itself. And that's the more you can free it, not get rid of the ego, but the more you can free that divine mind, the more clear and intuitive you'll be, the more creative you'll be, the more calm you'll be, and the more you're able to choose your life versus let your life, the patterns in your life, choose for you.
Absolutely.
So thank you for joining us. We'll do some more of these videos. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think, and we'll talk to you soon.
See you soon.